human-centered design as an interdisciplinary process. So just to go over the classes I took for this course thread, I took CS10, which is called The Beauty and Joy of Computing. I took CogSci 1, like many other people did here, which is the Intro to Cognitive Science. I took Art History R1B, which focused on installation art and writing about it. And I took IEOR 190C, which is an entrepreneurship class, and our focus there was Big Data Challenge. So starting off with the beauty and joy of computing, some topics from that class that I found really relevant to the course lead was abstraction, social implications, human-computer interaction, artificial intelligence, and application of all of those things. In Intro to Cognitive Science, a lot of people have touched on these things, but rationality and the actuality of human behavior in comparison to rationality. A really cool lecture in that class was brain-machine interfaces, as well as like human and machine and the implications between those two things. In my art history class, we talked about site specificity, heightened perception, activated spectatorship, and all of these things are really relating to human-centered design. As well as the IEOR class, we talked about obviously the Berkeley method of entrepreneurship, but also defining customer pain points, how to deal with failure, and your MVP, which is your minimum viable product. So focusing on the process of human-centered design, it's an iterative process that's always continuing, starting with design, prototyping, and evaluating, and going back and forth through all of these three things. So starting with design, I'm going to draw on abstraction and human behavior, because I think they're crucial parts of design and things that we should really think about when designing. So focusing on abstraction. Abstraction consists of removing details and generalization, and you don't really have to know how something's working to be able to use it, which we see in everything from cars to just your computer to your apps. You don't really know what machine things and engineering things are going on underneath the interface, and yet you can still fully use it. So comparing a car from the 1930s to today, the interface is still the same. So someone from the 1930s could step into a car today and still be able to use it because of abstraction. Another thing to remember in design is that humans are not rational. So because of our perceptual constraints, we always carry our own reasoning over actual logic. So just a big example of this is looking at the picture over there. I'm not sure if you can tell with the projection, but because of the heuristics that our visual system uses, it looks like the image is actually moving, but logically we know that it's a still image. So it's because of adaptation and our own heuristics that our perception is quite different from actual logical reasoning, and that's something very crucial to keep in mind when you're designing for humans. So after you've done your designing, you're going to move to prototyping. And three things I'm going to touch on today are your minimum viable product, heightened perception, and human-computer interaction. So when you're creating a prototype, you really want to keep minimum viable product in mind. So what's the least you can do to still reach your end goal? And because you want to do this in a way that you can put out multiple prototypes really quickly and get reactions on them to go through the process again. And some low fidelity techniques you can use are paper prototyping and video prototyping, so you don't have to do all this hard engineering back work to just get feedback on your design before you can move forward. So heightened perception is also really important to keep in mind when you're designing your prototype. This is something I drew from my art history class. So you want to remember all the different senses. So it's not only visual and touch, but you can think of smell and the environment that they're going to use your prototype in. And you want to keep all of these things in mind. And this is an installation piece where basically you walk into this cave that was all inflatable objects. So not only are you like sinking into the floor, but there's colors that are moving around in the room, and you have all of these senses and the touch. So it's using all of your senses within that one installation piece, which I was really drawn to. And human-computer interaction is something to keep in mind when you're doing your prototype as well, because we've seen this shift in human-computer interaction from one computer to many people using it, to personal computing where everyone has their own computer, to now we're in the day when there's one person with a tablet, a cell phone, a GPS, and a laptop. So we're really focusing on collaboration and rich interaction in comparison to before when it was just human factors. So once you've made your prototype, you want to make sure that you're evaluating it. And I'm going to draw on social contacts and the use of failure. So within social context, it's important to remember like what other implications could your prototype have. For example, just education with technology. We have great courses like edX where anyone can go online and take a college course. But at the same time, we have things like Scantrons, which are really conforming how teachers are teaching and the material that they're presenting to their class, and how they're now teaching to basically multiple choice tests and true false instead of these like higher idealized things. Also, another thing is geotagging. Seems really cool and fun in a lot of apps, but at the same time, we have these websites popping up like, please rob me, because you can basically, once you're accessing all these different channels, figure out where people are and where they're not, which is something to keep in mind. Another thing that's really important when you're evaluating is failure. Failure is actually a great thing, as my IUR 190C class really drilled into us. You want to learn to fail, and you want to learn to fail fast, so you're not spending a lot of time on the same issues over and over again. You want to learn how to see that failure as a learning point, and how you can add that to a thing they introduced to us called a dead poll, which is basically like keeping a list of all the things that you've decided were bad, that you've got bad reactions to, so you can make sure that you're not getting stuck on them over and over again and actually learning from them. So since I've gone over the process, I'm now going to talk about 2 applications that I've done outside of the classes. So this is the startup that I'm working on called Trial Flow that just got into Venture Lab, and I've used this process not only on just the ideation of what are we going to actually do for our startup, but starting to build the mobile app and things like that. It's a clinical software startup. Another application is the research I've been doing with the CS professor named Carlos Sequin and the Citrus Invention Lab. We're basically kind of using the premise a bit like Legos, creating modular sculptures, but in an interface that anyone can use. And a lot of the mathematics for these modular sculptures are based off of knots, so it's much more complex than Legos, but they're still usable to anyone at any age group, from young kids to adults, to create some really interesting things. So that's my presentation today. I want to thank you guys for listening, and I guess we'll hold questions to the end.
Okay, so why don't all of our presenters come up to the front, and we can ask you some questions, you can ask us some questions about your projects and experiences. Let me open the window here so we get some light in.
Okay, thanks. Do you guys have any questions for each other? Smaller audience, but was it Eric who was talking about Google Glass in his presentation right after yours, Matei? And yours was all about the use of public space, right? So how do you think about something like Google Glass changing public space or the use of public space, or certain technologies impacting public space in the way that you
It's actually really interesting because he started talking about the Oculus.
yeah, tell me about the Oculus. I've heard that, but I don't really know much of that.
Well, as he was explaining, it's kind of it's a new software that's been presented to, well, it's just been being talked about, and it's pretty much taking your smartphones and things like Google Glass and doing exactly what Google Glass has been advertising. And so everywhere you see, there's pretty much a second layer to the 3D. So you're getting like an extra 2-dimension to the 3-dimensional world that you're seeing, where you're getting reviews and feedback and comments alongside everything that you're seeing. So it's kind of like Iron Man, honestly.
Right, yeah, I was thinking.
So in that sense, it's really kind of interesting because although I spoke a lot about the way people kind of interpret space, just because of I was bringing in the historical and modern city, in the way in human design, it's a very interesting connection, because as pretty much as like all of you guys have talked about, there's a lot that there's a lot in the design of things that is very influential to how people work, and especially with what you were talking about, it's kind of a very elaborate consumer slash just user in general in today's modern day, and compared to what I was talking about, it's what is influential on our interpretation of space. And that is kind of a very controversial subject because that has a lot of different philosophical understandings to it as well. That kind of goes into another area of discussion. But it also is the reimagining of what we actually are seeing. And what really is kind of difficult to talk about right now is just because it can go in so many different directions, is that like it has those philosophical things and there's so much controversy with the internet. And that's one thing I didn't get to talk about is what's real and what's fake. And that's kind of where I was going to go with my blurred lines and tension. Because as we all know on the internet today, like so many people are like copy pasting everything. I call it copy pasta anymore just because pasta's, we get pasta in so many different kinds of bags. There's so many different forms, but it's like, but in that case, what's real then? What's the original or what's, such and such.
Right, well, that
And
is
so,
a philosophical, right, the art with
Exactly.
reproduction and,
so there's a lot of different directions that the conversation could go from that point, but it's all, it's all interconnected. So.
Yeah.
That's really interesting because in the information class I was saying that back when writing or script had kind of just come about with printing, Plato and Socrates had a debate about how writing is going to be a bad form, how the spoken word is more truthful than writing, and there was this huge debate, and big philosophers were saying that writing is actually not going to be good, and how people shouldn't write, they should speak, and that's how they should pass down stories and knowledge. So it's interesting how we're having that debate about the internet now.
Right, the resistance to
Mhm.
new technology.
I have a question. It's really interesting for me to see your synthesis of your courses from a student standpoint, because then we as faculty then see the courses through your eyes. I thought that was really cool. I enjoyed that. I'm curious, you have such an eclectic mix of courses, and I remember when we first set up the list of courses for human-centered design, there's some on this list I don't remember.
Yeah, I think there's some, the students actually, because we give the option to students to recommend courses
Yeah, so
and
that's-
send in and
I think that's
review.
great.
Yeah.
I think that's great. How did you pick your courses? And did you recommend any to be added to the list?
Personally, I was already taking all of those courses because I thought they were interesting, or different requirements for different majors. So I kind of stumbled upon CourseThreads because I actually worked for Townsend Center of Humanities, which is how I found out about it. But and then I realized wow, all of these are already coming together, so I should do a CourseThreads about it.
I have the same situation,
Yeah.
which is why I was doing the historical modern city and human-centered design, was because I had already taken the classes that would fulfill those two. So
Yeah, half of mine were cognitive science classes since I'm a cog sci major, and then the other two were just classes that I found interesting because I was pursuing design through other organizations, and then that's how those came into mine.
Yeah, I'm kind of the same, but with Shefali, but I included in my presentation some courses that I thought needed to be added, and those were specifically psychology courses that I don't think are included right now in the design program
Oh,
specifically.
okay. You can send them to us. So we
Yeah.
go through the syllabus, if you have the syllabus.
Mhm.
Okay, great.
Did this coming together then today, or this, what do you call this?
The
Symposium.
The symposium. Synthesis, yeah.
How did that work in your mind about synthesizing it? Because I think that's what's unique about it. Maybe you were going to take those courses together, but you might not have thought of them as being interrelated.
I know when I was initially making this presentation, at first I was it took me a good time of thinking just to think, how am I going to connect all of these? Because I definitely feel the connection in between them, but especially with the art history class, pulling that in with the other ones was a bit more hard. But it made me think more about it. And then coming to the symposium, it kind of got me interested in other classes that people had taken or other programs that people had done or student groups that I would want to follow up on.
Yeah, first I thought of them as my cog sci classes, and then these are kind of the additional thread classes that all kind of come together. But then as I was doing the presentation, I saw how they really did tie together. And I had struggled with some more than others. Like I mentioned, the like game theory econ class is like a little bit more of a stretch because that was more, because the focus of the class is more on problem solving, but when I took a step back, I saw how it also tied together. So it was helpful to get that big picture view instead of just looking at like all the assignments we did and all the details of the classwork.
Well, all my landscape architecture classes have all kind of brought in many different aspects to them. Because there's so many things that have to be understood before a city or landscape is created. And then pretty much the other two courses, R23AC and TDPS 60 that were part of the human-centered design that I was doing, those brought in, as I said, they kind of brought in their own interpretations. And the thing with all of it is that for me, it goes, I was making the connections completely, but there's so many different pieces. And I could go, when I was actually first seeing about course threads and how they all work together, I actually didn't know which direction to go in. Just because I was like, okay, well I could go this way, I could go that way, I could go that way. I don't know what to do because there's just so many different ways to like talk about it. I could talk about segregation, I could talk about space and interpretation. I could try to like blend it all in, which is kind of what I tried to do. But the way all my professors taught the courses, they all managed to bring in so many different applications, so that it was very comprehensive, and so that was really already understood when I was starting to work on this. Plus, I took a philosophy course this semester, and that gave me a completely different perspective on a lot of different things. So.
I think Berkeley does a really great job, especially as you get into your more upper division courses. You start to see the similarities and the emerging themes that are kind of reiterated by the professors here. But I think what course threads did for me is to think about one of the classes which I didn't think was related to anything else, which is the information, the history class or history of information class. Which when I signed up for it, I wasn't really sure what I was getting myself into. I was like, oh, okay, this is just going to be a history class. But in doing it, then I started to see how the patterns of technology throughout time, and we see it today, we saw it before, and the class kind of emphasizes how you need to understand that to continue to develop. So it was nice to kind of see that and tie it to other things I've learned as well.
I know it's late, but I have just one more question. So today's, all of the human-centered design presenters was pretty evenly male-female. Do you feel the design world, how is gender, do you feel it's pretty egalitarian in terms of males, women, and men working together, or do you feel like the tech is more still male-centered? And I thought of this especially because you had one of your slides had the computer was the man, and the brain was the female, and that's a classic sort of technology male, female nature kind of binary.
No, I think I agree too, because actually I was talking to a friend the other day. I went to visit his office and I said, how many female engineers do you have here?
Yeah, right.
And he said, he had to think about it. He stopped there and I was like, and he looked around and he's like, I guess none.
Like they never noticed.
And they
Yeah,
never noticed. They never noticed. And I saw his art team was over there and I was like, but they're all girls. And he was like, did you ever notice that? And he's like, I guess not. It's kind of how it's always been. And I'm like, and that's just an interesting point.
Yeah.
That's how it's always been. And I think in Berkeley, I think we're lucky because I think the space here is very much equal. And it's starting to change, I think, kind of in the professional world. But I still do think there's a little bit of separation between females being more aesthetically driven, design-oriented, men being more computational, tech, engineering-driven. But I think it's changing.
I'm doing a minor in CS, and there's definitely many more men in CS classes. I did robotics all through high school, so I was kind of used to that culture. And then with Cog Sci, you take a lot of, I've taken a lot of art classes, and even just in psychology classes, the culture of the class itself is very different. Like CS, they have questions in lecture where they ask us to talk to the people around us, and people don't talk unless if you already know someone that you like walked in with to the class. And this is also because it's like bigger classes, like the average class in like the 61 series, I think now is like 1,000 kids or something crazy. Versus like my psychology lectures, you walk in and people just talk to you, they smile. It's much more social of an environment. And there are more girls in the psychology classes, but there's still lots of guys too. It's not like it's only women. But it is, I guess it really surprised me this semester, like how different the culture was in the two classes.
So I say one comment that this is Design Fast Week, and you're probably all totally busy with finishing your classes and everything else. But if you are interested in just checking out one of these other design classes, it's Design Fest 2014. If you just do a web search on that in Berkeley, you'll probably find it. And you're certainly welcome to my Human Centered Design class has had their trade show tomorrow at 11:30 at the football stadium. The Innovation Lab.
Okay.
Football stadium.
Good. Okay,
All
well,
right,
thank you
thank
very
you.
much, everybody. And you didn't fill out your media release, so we can put your wonderful presentations on the web and T-shirts. And these are all large, but if you want something different,
Designing the way.
I can get you something.
So how many students get a certificate for our semester?
This is our biggest group, so we have 12 presenters and 11.
So that's still, you're worried about the sustainability of some of the topics. Well, I just started, advertising my advice to students. So, well, Sarah Bevan's doing a legal talk on,
Well, we have your,
so, the difference, I asked one of
Teresa's
the
out this
students
week,
who's
she
working
didn't
on
sign,
this
so
project.
when she's, back again,
And I think it's
I'll
work
make sure
structure.
she signs it.
Yeah,
So you have it,
Yeah.
because it's just, it's the,
But
Alan,
also
Teresa's,
with the threads,
Teresa's doing it, so Alan's
you
good
don't
at
have to take an
Teresa's,
overlap, the regular.
so she'll sign it.
Whereas the minor, you gotta take above your required
Right,
courses.
right.
So
I feel like, so you were working in the center,
some of these students are older than take these courses anyway.
right, yes.
But if they had to take.
Sorry, right,
additional
yeah.
to their regular
Yes,
courses,
exactly. So this will still have a place in terms of its selection.
Right,
Absolutely,
right.
and it might even draw some, it might even be an
And
interest.
so now you,
Yes.
so you're working on it, so that you're,
Yes.
sign more.
Yeah.
That's-
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, well, thank you so much for coming.
Outside, I wasn't.
Oh, okay. I should take that off. It's not quite a requirement. I prefer those so I can.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, so,
Because I'm usually double major, so I can do
And the other thing, did you do your,
But actually, I don't know if we're gonna do the double major anymore.
your course, your grad evaluation of the whole program yet? Okay, when you do that online, then I can review your, the only thing I noticed in my student assistance is that you didn't change
because I, when I was telling them.
full semesters.
I'm sorry, the initiative that just came out.
I saw on my verified site,
What do you want to do?
And,
2014 classes.
so, but most of them.
I love it. We had a big sign up for this. I started my research classes, so I know everything. So, the only problem is we ran out of this special paper. I didn't freak enough when she said, "How's that look?" And I just looked at the students. Yes, but I'm not supposed to release it to you until you fill out the evaluation. But if you just
online
say you're gonna do it, I will. Okay, I'll send you. Okay. Okay, so if you don't